Hello and welcome back to Ponytales, the YouTube show in which I read My Little Pony Friendship is Magic fanfictions. My name is Scribbler, and today we have Chapter 4 of Background Pony, written by Short Skirts and Explosions, and Chapter 4 is entitled Symphony of Solitude.
Empty and aching, tumbling and breaking, 'cause you don't see me, and you don't need me, and you don't love me the way I wish you would, the way I know you could. I dream a world where you understand.
Dear Journal, what does it mean to be alone? I mean truly alone. Have I come to a point of understanding the feeling? Is it enough when I fall asleep to my shivers and wake up to my tears? I've gone beyond feeling sorry for myself. I like to think that the pony I am today is some pony older, braver, stronger, and smarter. But no matter how many qualities that pony may possess, she's still alone. I'm so very alone. I cannot deny that, yet I can't allow myself to be obsessed with that. After all, what purpose is there in such a fixation? What purpose is there in anything? There has to be a purpose in all of this. Believing in some sort of purpose is what keeps me going, what keeps me banging my head against the thick wall of my predicament. It's not that I don't have enough things ushering me forward. I want to be remembered. I want to make a true impact on these wonderful ponies' lives. I want to walk up to those whom I once knew and have them recognize me on sight. I want to be able to make new friends and have them look forward to seeing me in the future. But as I write all of these things, and remember that I am in fact the only one writing them, I wonder if I'll only ever be the single, solitary pony dreaming of them, instead of living them. And so, Pinkie Pie plopped a box full of chocolate cupcakes atop the table in the center of Sugar Cube Corner. She gazed at her two friends with excited blue eyes.
Then, he says, the Pegasi are promising beautiful weather for Ponyville this weekend. What are you up to Saturday afternoon, Miss Pie?
Twilight Sparkle and Rarity gawked at her, their faces blank. Yes? And? Rarity chirped emphatically.
I say to him, I'll be up to what I'm always up to on a Saturday afternoon. 10 bottles of sarsaparilla and a prayer.
Pinkie Pie's forelegs curled up against her chest as she giggled, gasped, and finally exclaimed,
Then he laughs and says, the shores of Lake Maelstrom look really pretty this time of year.
She rolled her eyes.
Like that has anything to do with sarsaparilla.
Pinkie, Twilight breathily remarked. Rarity was leaning forward, her blue eyes sparkling. You do realize, of course, that the stallion was trying to ask you out?
Oh!
Pinkie Pie blinked. She narrowed her eyes with a quizzical expression.
Really? What for?
I think someone's smitten with you, Pinkie. Twilight smiled and levitated a mug of tea to her lips. Please tell me you at least acknowledged his gesture? Pinkie Pie scratched her chin as her blue eyes swam across the ceiling.
I can't remember if I did or not. He kind of galloped out of there really quickly.
Oh? Rarity's face sank. Whatever for?
Beats me, though it was after I tossed a lemon custard pie into his face.
Twilight Sparkle spit out a mouthful of tea. She teetered over the edge of the table and gasped for breath. Rarity was almost fainting. What? Pinkie? Twilight rediscovered her voice in time to splutter forth. What could possibly have possessed you to toss a pie into a poor stallion's face? He was only trying to bridge the communication between the two of you. Rarity was still reeling. What in Equestria were you thinking?
I was trying to do him a favor,
Pinkie Pie barked in her defense. And just how is that a favor? Twilight Sparkle exclaimed. He wanted to go out on a date with you. Pinky bit her lip, then shrugged.
I guess I just remembered something Dashy told me. All stallions ever want from a mirror is some pie. The poor guy was so shy, I figured I'd cut him to the chase.
Twilight and Rarity stared at Pinkie Pie for 10 numb seconds, until finally they cracked. A snorting sound shattered into a series of unrelenting giggles. Their half of Sugar Cube Corner vibrated with pure joy's melodic cadence. Pinkie joined in the laughter, though an undeniable redness was blossoming beneath her cheeks.
I don't get it. Should I have tossed a cake at him instead?
Oh, Pinkie Pie! Twilight Sparkle could hardly breathe. Rarity leaned over and nuzzled Pinkie with a warm smile. Don't you ever change, darling. One of these days we're going to find you a gentle colt who'll gladly take pie in the face from you. Twilight Sparkle stood up and levitated the box of cupcakes with purple telekinesis. Come on, girls. Let's go to the park before the other three think we ditched today's picnic.
What about Strudel?
Pinkie Pie bounced happily after them as the three made for the exit of Sugar Cube Corner.
That's a little less messy than pie, though it's kind of crusty. Oh, I know! I could avoid the glaze. It'd make it much more aerodynamic when I toss it at him.
The other two laughed merrily, their high-pitched chorus ringing in my ears as they brushed past my table. I gazed over my shoulder from where I sat. Suddenly, the scent of dust wafted up my nostrils, and I realized I was squeezing a pair of ancient history books to my chest. Sighing, I relinquished hugging the library checkouts and opened them up atop the table before me. The inside of Sugar Cube Corner somehow felt less colorful. Less warm, too. I felt a chill dance through my body as I heard the last traces of Twilight's harmonious voice trailing from my ears. With a shudder, I pulled the stone-gray sleeves of my hoodie over my hooves and absorbed myself in a sea of text as forgotten and timeless as I. It's been almost 13 months since the curse began. In that time, my life has gotten calmer. My days are now filled with tranquility, purpose, and resolve. I'd be lying, however, if I said that things have gotten any easier. There are some nights when I don't have a magical tune echoing loudly against the walls of my mind. These would be blissful evenings, except that they afford me a chance to dream. There's nothing that makes a prison more painful than being able to dream. After all, what's the power of damnation without a slice of hope to merit its potency? When I dream, I see myself trotting across an empty Ponyville. There are no other ponies beside me. I am the only equine soul to be seen or heard. Every hoofstep is mine. Every written word belongs to me. Every breath and song and sob holds anchorage in my throat and mine alone. While this may seem like a nightmare, there are times when I prefer the world of these dreams to that which I am forced to endure every day. At least in my dreams, I am encompassed by desolation, a far more sensible prison than one that is barred with the faces of so many happy and warm ponies. Seeing Twilight Sparkle's smiles, hearing her voice, I am reminded of what we used to be. I'm reminded of the days when we and Moondancer were foals, when we played in the parks of Upper Canterlot, reenacting major events in equestrian history. Moondancer liked to pretend she was Princess Luna, and Twilight, of course, was always Princess Celestia. More often than not, I was stuck with playing the role of Star Swirl the Bearded. The other two would giggle and poke fun at me for having to portray the surly stallion sorcerer in our little get-togethers. It was worth it, though, because nothing made Twilight more happy than to be Princess Celestia. The world seemed a lot more colorful when she was smiling, and that was something I never wanted to disturb. When the years went by, and Twilight left Moondancer and I to live under the wing of Princess Celestia, I didn't realize it at first, but something had been drained from my life that could never be refilled. We three were young unicorns then, and like all magical ponies our age, we were far too eagerly swept up in learning history and spells and various Canterlot arts. Moondancer relocated to Philadelphia University to pursue her dream of becoming a teacher. I studied music and composition at Celestia School for Gifted Unicorns. Our days were spent in becoming living repositories of knowledge. We pursued the future in our separate ways. As a result, our companionship dissolved, allowing our education and careers to take the forefront of our lives. Not once, however, did this bother us in any way. Our friendship was something immortal, something immaculate. Occasionally, Twilight Sparkle, Moondancer, and I would get back together and talk about the directions our lives had taken us. We'd muse about the things we did in our foalhood. So long as we had the memories of what we once were, we could accept what we'd become. Our friendship would last as long as we could remember that which united us. Today, I am the only pony who can afford those memories. Moondancer and Twilight have lost something, and they don't even know it. But do they have to know it? As long as I remember them, as long as I let them laugh, smile, and play Luna and Celestia in my mind, then nothing is lost. I believe this with all my heart. Then why is it that I see Twilight day in and day out, and I feel as though a phantom limb is speaking to me? That something lopped off my soul is screaming to be reattached, only to remain a numb specter of something warm and irrecoverable. I am so happy, so exceedingly enraptured to see Twilight Sparkle having made so many friends in Ponyville. There was a time when I was worried about her. Moondancer and I pursued our careers with great vigor, but Twilight Sparkle had treated her career like a veritable obsession. On so many instances, I attempted to have the three of us reunite, and only Moondancer would show up. Together, we'd worry over Twilight's path in life. We missed her and shared a mutual concern over the future she was paving for herself. In her foalhood, Twilight always held a major attachment to Princess Celestia, but Moondancer and I both doubted she was aptly prepared for the consequences of being so closely connected to an immortal alicorn. That's why it fills me with such joy to see Twilight Sparkle having relocated to Ponyville. There are ponies here with whom she's had the opportunity to commune. I truly think they've saved her from a life of perpetual isolation, a fate that would have stripped her heart of the opportunity to feel with the same vitality that she's exercised her mind. And yet, every time I see her and her friends, I can't help but wonder if things could have been different. I came to Ponyville to visit her during the Summer Sun celebration. What if the same opportunity that blossomed for Twilight would have opened a door for me? Perhaps I could have been making the same friends as her, attending the same gatherings as her, going to the same picnics and laughing over the same anecdotes and smiling at the same thoughts with her. I have lived long enough to know that life is the sum of its days, and yet the flavor of its dreams. Sometimes the most beautiful choir is the one you can't join, the one you can only listen to. It's been many years, and I feel like I'm still playing the role of Star Swirl the Bearded, giving the spotlight to Twilight Sparkle, allowing her to illuminate the stage with her smile. It's a wonderful play, and it deserves an encore. I just don't know how long I can sit here alone with my applause. A few days ago, I stumbled through the door to my log cabin, and it felt just like any other afternoon I've ever lived. The same walls embraced me, dangling with the many musical instruments I made to be shared with no pony but myself. A fireplace yawned in waiting, something that would be lit at night, a night just like any other, spent alone with my thoughts and shadows. The routine I live by is mind-numbing. As soon as I step over the hearth that I've built for myself, I know what the next few hours are going to consist of. I know that I'll be reading one of the many ancient tomes checked out from Twilight's library. I know that I'll be scouring the texts for any tiny bit of info that can clue me into the magical secrets behind Nightmare Moon. I know that I'll come up with either nothing or very little to go by, and the rest of the daylight will be spent sitting out on the patio, attempting to eke beauty from the fringe of the wilderness around me. Then, when evening falls, and the shivers make my bones twitch on the verge of a moonlit waltz, I surrender to the blankets of my cot, staring into the fireplace, trying to imagine another world where there is a smile for every tear, a laugh for every sob, and a pair of ears besides mine for every fear I have to stammer into the gaping abyss of the night. Why do I even write this? Every 10 journal entries or so, I ask the same question, and it is just as pointless and rhetorical as all the others. Right now, as I ramble poetically, I am sitting on a bench about 20 yards from the Carousel Boutique. It's a sunny day. There are very few clouds in the sky. The same squirrel has crawled up to me for the 5th consecutive occasion. I don't know if it realizes I've given it the same morsel of food 4 times in a row. Candy Mane has flown by 3 times, each time waving and saying the same greeting. Miss Hooves has trotted past the bench with Dinky, giving me the same smile and nod that she did yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. 20 minutes ago, for the sake of whimsy, I stood up from the bench and scuffed my name in the dirt path with my rear hooves. Sitting back down, I decided to count the number of ponies who stopped to give the 4-letter word a cognitive glance. 20 minutes have gone by, and my count is still at 0. An hour will pass, 4 hours, 5 days, 1,000 years, and I don't expect that number to go up any. Why do I write this for other than myself? What other pony do I have to look after, to provide for, to feed, or to blanket, or to comfort? Who else will read this? Who else will have the ability to read this? Am I just circling words down a gaping tunnel? There are times when I feel as if I'm the only indulging myself with a great bowl of nothing. It would make far greater sense to write nameless songs in the dirt, or to fatten a squirrel to the bursting point. There was a time when I used to compose music for a hobby. After all, why study music if you're not going to make more of it? It used to bug my parents. There were nights that I spent in my upstairs bedroom, repetitively strumming away the same stubborn tune with a lyre or harp, attempting to unlock a musical symphony that I knew for sure would be Canterlot's next masterpiece. These days, my symphonies are not my own. I go to bed and wake up with tunes haunting my mind, resonating in my horn like some accursed tuning fork. I do everything in my power to drag them out of me, just short of screaming. The nights are cold, freezing, and frightening. When I finally break the music down into a palpable composition, it hardly brings warmth, for another melody is there to take its place, filling my ears like ghost whispers. There are no strings left to pluck and call my own, for I'm still threading loose the shadows of Nightmare Moon's endless night. Perhaps, then, what's left of me to claim as my own is my words. This journal is a solitary piece, performed in a cappella, an ode to joy, so long as I have joy to perceive, like a glimpse of the past or a hope for the future. I know very well that I may be the only pony to read what I'm writing right now, but perhaps such is for the best. So long as I fill these entries with that which is beautiful, that which is inspiring, then it's like a symphony that I can call my own. There are many times and tunes I've yet to unlock before I can even hope to tackle this curse. However, I must never lose grasp of the most important composition, to which I am the only one true conductor. I only wish the elegies were so clearly defined.
Are you sure these are books you want to check out?
Spike looked down at me from where he stood, perched atop a rolling ladder that was leaning against a bookcase full of dusty tomes.
They're not written in Equestrian Basic. From what Twilight Sparkle says, many are written in Moon Winnie. I don't suppose you've got a lay pony's knowledge of the lunar tongue, Miss,
Heartstrings, I murmur. I trot across the library and stand at the base of the ladder. And you shouldn't concern yourself too much. I know this is dense reading material. Let's just say that I've had time to invest in learning some of the old languages.
Hey, that's fine with me,
Spike said with a shrug as he pulled 2 large books out from their shelving. He winced at the sight of a scurrying spider and brushed loose a few flimsy cobwebs.
Honestly, I think it's kind of cool. Most ponies who visit this library, and Twilight Sparkle will be the first to tell you this, they come looking for a cookbook or an adventure novel or some other really simple thing. It's a shame that she isn't here to help you find this sort of stuff. Then again,
he smiled as he crawled his small, portly frame down the ladder, balancing the books in a tiny hand.
Maybe it's all for the best. She'd get all excited that her fellow unicorn was checking out stuff biz old and would talk your ear off about ancient equestrian history.
I couldn't help but brandish the thinnest of smiles. You say that as if it's a bad thing.
To each their own. I feel kind of bad for some of the ponies who come here to study, especially when it's a gorgeous day outside. It seems like some of them just never get to leave.
I took a deep breath and took the book from him with gentle telekinesis. Believe me, I understand completely. I adjusted the collar of my hoodie with a slight shiver before adding, Still, it's worth it when we have forgotten treasures to uncover.
That almost sounds exciting.
He smiled, his rows of razor-tiny, sharp teeth showing.
You must be doing some sort of wicked cool research project, Miss Heartstrings.
I'll settle for cool, all right, I said with a nod. The jury's still out on wicked.
Gee, I don't know.
He scratched his green spikes and gave the books in my levitating grasp a slightly detestable glance.
I always get the chills when I touch books from our lunar collection.
You're not the only one.
'Cause, really, Twilight's told me enough about them. The legacy of Nightmare Moon used to be a big deal long before Princess Luna returned from her whole 1,000-year imprisonment. And all Twilight says that many of the books written in Moon Winnie were banned from libraries across Equestria. Can you believe that? It has something to do with Princess Celestia being concerned that mortal ponies would read what Luna had written and somehow be afflicted by the taint of Nightmare Moon.
It was called the Great Canterlot Eclipse, I explained to him, mentally quoting Twilight as I shuffled over to a desk and prepared for a long afternoon of studying. Scholars write about it to this day. It was a dark time in the aftermath of Nightmare Moon's tyranny, when literature underwent a great deal of censorship. Eventually, as a few centuries rolled by, Princess Celestia realized the error of her ways, and she lifted the ban. This gave birth to the modern equestrian Renaissance, and Canterlot was founded as a center of art and learning, ultimately leading to it becoming the capital city of Equestria. Still, the effects of the Great Eclipse were evident in pony culture, and many things written down in the lunar archives remain undiscovered to this day. Spike whistled.
Wow, that's different than how Twilight explains it.
That struck me rather curiously. And just how does she explain it?
Simply that most ponies are too scared to read things that were once held in the library of Princess Luna.
Well, that's perfectly understandable, I said sagely. There's a great deal of darkness and loss attached to the name Nightmare Moon.
Yeah, well.
He winked and pointed my way.
If it gets too freaky to research on your own, just give me a whistle. Even Twilight will say that I'm a pretty good research assistant. Don't be afraid to ask if you need help with anything, Miss Heartstrings.
Really? I opened one of the old tomes, waved the cloud of dust away, and squinted over the many alien words. My question was a very droll, tone-deaf plea. Could you, by chance, tell me anything about the cosmic matriarch? Spike's emerald eye slits blinked dazedly.
The cosmic what now?
It's an old mare's tale, as far as most ponies are concerned, Twilight Sparkle had once said, but I happen to know it's a lot more than that. I gulped. I shivered. It was barely 2 months into my curse. I was living out of a green tent pitched alongside an abandoned barn just outside of town. That day I sat in the waiting room of Aloe and Lotus's day spa, pretending to be another anxious customer, just so I could interrupt Twilight for this one desperate conversation. To this day, I thank my lucky stars that she was gracious enough to ignore the sight of the shivering bum in a stone-grey sweat jacket, looking like she needed far more than a frivolous massage or pedicure. "How's that?" I murmured, trying to keep my composure. The world was a frigid tomb. My mind reeled from the same miserable tune, spinning like a broken record in the thick of my skull. "How do you know it's more than an old mare's tail?" "Because Princess Celestia has spoken about it. Or her," she giggled. "Or perhaps them. Whatever the case, I have no doubt that the cosmic matriarch is real. I've been our magical ruler's apprentice long enough to hear her infer as much." "Infer?" I gulped, struggling to remain still in the chair. The shivers were unbearable. I fought them courageously. I had to appear here as interested in this conversation as my heart genuinely felt. "You mean to say that she's never outright come out and told you what the cosmic matriarch is?" Twilight shifted with momentary discomfort. For a moment, I was afraid that I'd struck a nerve, that I'd lost her desire to educate me. To my elation, she continued, though pensively so. "It's very personal to her, I think, and I don't say that lightly. Princess Celestia has lived for a very, very long time. It's very difficult to stumble upon things that she takes personal stock in." "But she does with this?" "Mm-hmm. And Princess Luna as well. You see..." Twilight smiled and brushed a hoof through her mane as we waited our turns with Aloe and Lotus. "The princesses who look after the sun and moon are immortal. However, while that fact is irrefutable, it makes ponies overlook something very important. Ironically, it's the one thing that every magician in Equestria has to learn before starting their career." I swallowed hard and uttered, "Everything has a beginning." Twilight glanced at me with pleasant surprise. "Why, yes! How would you know that? Are you also a magician, Miss Heartstrings?" I bit my lip and avoided her gaze. This was my 5th identical conversation with Twilight Sparkle, and I was only just then getting used to the whole ritual. "I've done my fair share of reading," I confessed, and lied at the same time. All I knew were words, terms, names, and very few of them in equestrian modern. "But it's my understanding that no pony has ever been taught the true origin to the princesses of Equestria." "And for good reason," Twilight said with a nod. Her lavender features were bathed in the gentle light of an aroma candle, giving my foalhood friend an ethereal quality as she spoke of holy things. "Mortal ponies live, 60 to 70 years? 90 years at most. Starswirl the Bearded was a major exception, of course, but most ponies are lucky if they see so much as a century go by before their time on Earth is over. Can any of us really imagine what it's like to be an alicorn? To have lived for eons? To have seen the foundation of this world and the birth of the sun and moon themselves?" I fought another wave of chills, staring off into the distant candles as if they were alien stars twinkling beyond us. "I can imagine many things. It's a whole different situation to feel." I glanced back at her. I could only hope my eyes were as sincere as my words. "What does Princess Celestia feel? Do you know?" "I wish I could tell you, Miss Heartstrings. I wish I could know, so I could tell it all of my friends, or to any pony for that matter. But even though I am Celestia's apprentice, there are many things that are still a mystery to me, and I think when it comes to the topic of the cosmic matriarch, it's far too sensitive a thing to press the princess for information about." "You think she isn't willing to share what she knows?" Twilight squirmed with a sudden awkwardness. No, it's something far different than that, I think. Or at least I theorized." "Oh?" She looked at me. Her eyes were suspiciously vulnerable. "Would you, Miss Heartstrings, attempt talking about your mother? If you'd lived for so long that you could hardly remember her?" A sharp breath left me. The shadows in the room doubled like the thick curtain of night. I never once thought of that." Twilight gently nodded. I imagine Celestia thinks of that every day, which is why I'm so reticent to bring it up in conversation. I let my gaze fall. I'm sorry. Hey, she smiled and leaned forward. Don't be. It's healthy to be curious, but we mustn't forget that there are still sacred boundaries in the world. Besides, though Celestia may not have much to talk on the subject, she did once say something that has stuck with me for as long as I've known her. I glanced at her again. What's that? Twilight was grinning, a very soft and childish expression. When I first became her apprentice, I asked her about the creation of the world. She was very vague in her answer, except for one curious detail. She stifled a giggle, cleared her throat, and quoted her mentor. The world began like all things began, my apprentice, not with a mere breath, but with a song. What is this song? Is it the same thing that gets stuck in my head every morning and every night of my life? Have I been made capable of sensing something that no other equestrian soul has been blessed or cursed to witness? Why me? Why me alone? And what does Nightmare Moon have to do with it? This is what I struggle over. This is what I rack my brain with. Day after day, in Twilight's library, on park benches, before the fireplace of my cabin, under candlelight, in the frigid glow of the moon and the gentle kiss of the morning sun, I rummage through books, tomes, scrolls, in search of an answer, until my eyes gloss over with the dust and exhaustion of all the ages this mortal soul is constantly struggling to catch up with. It's taken me several months, and I am only barely scratching the surface of history's forgotten answers, assuming that there are indeed answers, and not just red herrings disguised by the obscure layers of time. The richest details are lost in several languages, and most of them dead. I've relied on codex, translations, almanacs, and various other legends that dig and chip away at mountains of lunar speech, and the most I know is that there is even more that I don't know, and may never know. Was Nightmare Moon a musician first and a despot second? This should come as no surprise. My constant research over the last year has granted me remarkable insight. It turns out that every sentient culture in Equestria has a common retelling of a great deceiver whose gift was in the musical arts before turning into the bane of righteousness. Minotaurs write of a royal lyricist who, once scorned by a lover, trapped his entire kingdom in a labyrinthine spell. Diamond dogs, often considered to be illiterate, actually possess several scrolls depicting a tribe of murderers who led their brothers astray with a howl of cyclones. Even dragons have a spoken legend that tells of an ancient queen who petrified her brothers and sisters using a magically resonating diamond. Perhaps my discoveries are a result of me, a cursed unicorn, looking specifically for information that relates to her plight. Still, I can't shake the uncanny coincidence of so many similar legends being told across multiple different civilizations. It's no secret that Princess Luna has an appreciation for musical arts. Then again, so does Princess Celestia. The sisters are both alicorn rulers of ponydom. It'd be a heinous crime to not invest in the same culture that defines those whom they rule over. However, it's always been an accepted notion that ponies of ancient times relished more in the daytime than in the nighttime, and as a result, Celestia's patronage was expressed in song and dance, whereas worship of Luna was far more subdued. It doesn't take an immortal soul to imagine Luna seeking music of her own to fill the gap. But what connection could that have, if any, to the cosmic matriarch? I am certain, no, I am convinced, that there must be a common thread. Twilight Sparkle is an apprentice after Celestia's own heart. If she quotes the princess saying that all things begin with a song, I simply have no choice but to believe her. Our alicorn rulers began what the rest of the world did. They're the only ones possessed with the ability to remember. What better a way is there to preserve memories than through music? Yes, this song is real. I am a lone soul, imprisoned in a cold bottle, echoing with these ghostly melodies, like hidden phantoms on the dark side of the moon. Once I find them, I can find myself, and maybe, just maybe, I can rebroadcast them to the world, so that more ponies than just the alicorns can remember what has been lost since the foundation of everything, and then I can be as real as the song, too. Just yesterday morning, I knew it was time. I had put off the performance of the Threnody of Night for far too long. I had run out of excuses, just as I had run out of fear. There comes a time when the desperation to find answers overcomes the trepidation of the cold journey ahead. Yesterday was just such a time. I had all the bits I needed to buy the ingredients. I had all the time to make my trip. I just didn't look forward to the energy it was going to sap from me. I needed to go to the Everfree Forest, and that meant bundling up. Where I was headed, the hoodie simply wouldn't be enough. It started with woolen socks. I slid these over my hooves, then slipped them into thick galoshes that went halfway up my fetlocks. I grabbed a thick brown cloak that I hadn't worn in over a month and draped it over my entire body. Next came a familiar yellow scarf that still carried with it the felicity of an elegant unicorn's generous smile. Finally, I grabbed a black snow cap that I'd sewn for myself, with a hole made to allow my horn to pierce through. Grabbing a bag of bits, I telekinetically flung the dual hoods of the sweat jacket and cloak over my head and stumbled out the door to my cabin. It was a 30-minute trot until I could get to the edge of the Everfree Forest, to where the thick bundle of clothing would prove useful. Until then, I sweated uncomfortably, assaulted by the warmth that was actually unbearable for once. Despite the temptation to strip off at least the cloak or galoshes, I pressed on, knowing that soon I would be wishing for all of the world's blankets to be engulfing me. I wondered what I looked forward to the least, making this trip, or performing the instrumental once I had acquired what I needed. I had to keep my mind distracted, if only to give me strength, if only to make me think of other situations where sweating profusely was as comical as it was awkward, like trying to explain my cutie mark for the millionth time to Applejack's and Rarity's sisters, or receiving a flower from Morning Dew. Morning Dew. A sigh escaped my lips, and I smiled for the first time in days. It's funny, all of my writings on the beauty of friendship and my hopes for relinquishing the binds of this curse, and it's still those two words that can bring me joy without fail. My burdensome journey became slightly more bearable, and I marched into the thick forest refreshed, so that I meditated calmly for once and did what every musician does when she's relaxed. I composed. There are 7 lunar elegies connected to my curse. I know this only because they are all that I have discovered so far. They come to me without warning or announcement, infecting my mind, born in sleep or in waking fright. If it was a song that began the world, then it was one that ended me, and I must carefully bridge the gap between creation and annihilation. Lunar Elegy number 1, as Twilight helped me discover, is the Prelude to Shadows. Referred to only once in the Royal Equestrian Compendium, Volume 12, it's the first piece of evidence in the lunar archives that suggests that Princess Luna ever took a hobby in musical composition. To that end, it was the first tune that was stuck in my head the very moment I awoke to a world that perpetually forgot me. Like all of the elegies that come to my mind, I endeavored to understand the nature of Prelude to Shadows. That meant performing the melody myself once I had completed the composition. I knew that there was something mystical and enchanting about the piece. What I didn't bet on was an actual magical effect for playing it out with my lyre. No sooner was I done with Prelude to Shadows when I found myself experiencing a severe mood shift.
I became nervous, paranoid, and easily frightened. Every loose shape and beam of light spoke to me, as if something beyond the walls were closing in. I was almost mortified when another tune immediately took the prelude place in my mind. Lunar Elegy No. 2, also thanks to Twilight, would turn out to be called Sunset Bolero. When performing the prelude and bolero back to back, I realized that the music called for a smooth transition. It was then that I realized that the elegies coming to my mind weren't just random tunes. They were a suite, and I was on the verge of unfolding a grandiose symphony of mysterious proportions. When I first played the Sunset Bolero, I was pleased to not experience a wave of uneasiness, the likes of which the prelude afflicted me with. Instead, I was overcome with an excitement I didn't expect. My heart's pulse rate went up and stayed that way for over 36 hours. I felt like I could run a marathon. Whether this was magically the result of the bolero's heavy percussion or some sort of unexplained impetus that only Nightmare Moon could understand, I was at a loss to know. I was merely a mortal playing the tunes of an unearthly alicorn spirit. I was willing to bet that with only 2 performances, I was retaining more knowledge than even poor Princess Luna herself was capable of knowing at that point in time. Lunar Elegy No. 3 took me a while to figure out, for I at first thought that I was simply hearing Sunset Bolero over again. It took several hours of meditating into the long, cold night before I finally realized that the third elegy was a modified version of the bolero, slowed down with a melancholic dissonance. Desperate for an explanation, I rummaged through the lunar texts available to me in Twilight's library. It took over 2 months, but upon mastering enough words of the lunar tongue, I was finally able to look upon an ancient passage depicting Princess Luna and a second composition of one of her previous songs. This was how the March of Tides was born. Performing the March of Tides had an instant effect on me. It made me lightheaded, and time seemed to slow down. I realized then what the Sunset Bolero was preparing me for, because if my heart wasn't ready for the creepy effect of the march, I may not have been able to finish the composition. It was at this point of discovery that I realized that not only were these elegies meant to be performed in time, but they were being fed to me in just the perfect order, as if there was some invisible purpose behind the whole thing. I now had an even greater reason to practice these enchanted tunes, for I suddenly felt that some other spirit besides myself was involved. Lunar Elegy No. 4 had no title, because for the longest time I didn't desire to name it. After the first performance, I had a panic attack, because I was blinded halfway through the instrumental. There's really no better way to describe it. Halfway through the performance, all the lights and colors were sucked out of the world. I remember collapsing in the middle of my new cabin that night, shivering, clutching at the shadows. I think I may have even screamed for help. Not that any pony could have heard me. It's difficult to remember. The important detail is that when the morning sun came, I could see it, and I was enraptured. After that, I gave up on pursuing the elegies for over 6 weeks. Could you blame me? I was dealing with a symphony that was beyond my control. My curse certainly wasn't being lifted with any of my subsequent performances. Besides, understanding it didn't make me any less vulnerable a mortal soul to the work of an equine goddess. However, as the days wore on and the fourth elegy resonated in the recesses of my mind, I was drawn back to the lyre like a mother to her sickly foal. I picked an evening when the moon was full. It was a pale glow of comfort to my frightened senses as I plucked forth at the strings once again. I performed the first elegy, then the second, then the third. Sure enough, halfway through Elegy No. 4, my vision left me. Bravely, blindly, I strummed on, and when I was finished with the composition, my vision returned. Not only that, but I was experiencing a strange peace, a tranquility that kept me awake and resolute in the middle of the night's freezing stare. The next day, I did some research at Twilight's library, and almost immediately stumbled upon an ancient tale about Princess Luna curing a village of a pestilence that had afflicted the pony's eyes. What was more, she did it with a song, and the name of it was Darkness Sonata. After the harrowing circumstances involving the sonata, I felt as though I could take on anything. So I engaged Elegy No. 5 with great courage and vigor. It turned out that my guile was almost for nothing. The fifth elegy resulted in a very comforting, almost whimsical experience. I wouldn't necessarily call it happy. A more appropriate word for it would be secure. According to Twilight Sparkle, the name of the instrumental is Waltz of Stars, and it's an appropriate name, too. Its cadence mimics the uplifting beat of the Sunset Bolero, while incorporating a dissonance akin to March of Tides, whereas Waltz of Stars achieves a far more transcendental effect. Playing the Waltz of Stars was ultimately a neutral experience. While the tune's whimsy and ethereal quality enchanted me at first, I felt for days after the song's performance a sense of longing. I couldn't sleep on account of how pathetically lonesome I felt. I couldn't stop thinking about the song, about the void through which my strings echoed, as if I was calling out to long-lost sisters I could never see again. Why siblings? I still don't quite understand it. But when I think about the song, I look up at the starry expanse, and suddenly I feel as if I have all the answers, even if they're not all discovered yet. Then there's Elegy No. 6. Twilight Sparkle immediately recognized the tune, and then she shocked me when she said that it was none other than the anthem to the Lunar Empire. She explained to me that the song had, in fact, been used as a military call to assembly in the years preceding the rise of Nightmare Moon. Before Princess Luna was banished with the elements of harmony, her tainted spirit tricked many unicorns into following her will. The result was an army that had gathered under Nightmare Moon's lead. Using these ill-fated ponies, the Dark Alicorn attempted to usurp the power of her sister and all the souls who defended her. It pains me to think that I was being taught by invisible tongues to learn a tune that had once met the bane of my very own ancestors. Unicorns almost went extinct as a result of the war between the holy siblings of Equestria. The elegies I was uncovering were frightful and mysterious, but they were not without their own sense of beauty. I think it goes without saying that even the most insidious of tools we invent in this world all start as a noble work of art. So, with great zeal, I pored through the pages of every ancient tome I could find. I soon discovered that almost anything related to the sixth elegy had been eliminated from modern history. In a way, it makes sense. No pony in their right mind would want to see something like the Lunar Empire become reborn in our day and age. Still, it's such a tragedy that fantastic works of art, beautiful by their merit alone, must absolutely be destroyed along with the nefarious shadows of the past. As my mind swam with the melancholic tunes being sung to my mind, it soon became clear that I didn't need to know the actual name of the elegy to ascertain its composition. Ever since my plight began, I've possessed an inexplicable sense that is not blemished by the fears and prejudice of time. Furthermore, I, of all ponies, should know that words are meaningless in my search. I can only imagine how much of Princess Luna's heart went into her symphony before her poisoned mind transformed it into something wicked. I decided to call the sixth instrumental Moon's Elegy, and its impact upon me was immediately noticeable upon performance. As soon as I had finished strumming the composition, I felt the chills of my curse doubling, tripling. It was as though every warm piece of the world had been pulled away from me. I felt numb, cold, hungry, and very impressionable. It suddenly made sense why this was such an easy song to corrupt warmongers to wield. If enough zealots were exposed to the moon's elegy, I could see a despot like Nightmare Moon making them do anything with the simple promise of lifting the very effects of the tune. As a matter of fact, the only way I was able to free myself from the paralyzing cold was to play my way back through elegies 1 through 5. Perhaps, then, it's excusable as to why I've been so hesitant to tackle elegy number 7, a tune that Twilight Sparkle has herself called Threnody of Night. A threnody is a song of tribute to the dead. I've hoped to be many things of the unraveling of this curse, but dead isn't one of them. And yet, what else am I to do? I certainly can't quit on these instrumentals. I learn them as I discover them. There is no skipping a tune, no jumping ahead to see how the entire symphony ends. I can't track down Princess Luna to ask for her help. I can't send a letter to Princess Celestia and call upon her wisdom. With the exception of Twilight's insight and Spike's research skills, both of which are fleeting assets at best, I am alone on this journey. It's a cold and treacherous trek, like a tiny pony flung into endless night, or a lone body trotting through a gloomy jungle. Yesterday, at noon, I marched slowly through the Everfree Forest. I had no choice but to take it easy. It didn't matter how desperate I felt. Breaking into a full gallop would waste my energy, and I was utilizing every bit of stamina in keeping myself from passing out in the middle of that dense foliage. It was cold. So very, very cold. My teeth chattered, and the hairs of my coat stood on end. Even beneath all of my bundled clothes, the cloak and the scarf and the snow cap and the sweat jacket, I was about ready to shatter into a million frozen pieces. When the curse struck me, I was located in the center of Ponyville, at Ground Zero, where Nightmare Moon first touched down upon the earth after 1,000 long years of banishment. For that reason, apparently, I am warmest in the heart of Ponyville. Moving out, I am shivering along the town's fringes, freezing at my cabin, and downright numb at places very distant from the center, places such as Sweet Apple Acres. In the Everfree Forest, I might as well be dead. The temperature is unbearable. To any other pony, I must look like a feverish mess, shivering beneath layers of wool and cloth. It's a feat in and of itself to pass my condition off as a temporary illness. I rarely ever trot out this far, and when I do, it's only when it's absolutely necessary. I needed the materials for performing the Threnody of Night. As a result, I had to keep going. I had to keep piercing the forest. Soon enough, I would have found my destination. Every time I looked at the uneven path ahead of me, the trail appeared to stretch on even further. To avoid fainting, I tilted my gaze upwards and allowed the frail specks of sunlight to bleed through the foliage and play with my eyes, keeping me awake. I've been told that the Everfree Forest is supposed to be frightening, that the unchecked growth of nature is a scary change from the orderly world that stewards like the Pegasi maintain for us. As far as I'm concerned, all of the nightmarish things of the Everfree are invisible and harmless, at least in comparison to the very real cold that assaults my body each time I venture out there. Making a sort of trek like I did yesterday is the mystical equivalent of diving into a subterranean lake hidden beneath a polar ice cap. I'd be warmer if I gathered a syringe full of permafrost and shoved it into an open vein. Toying with the mystical effects of the lunar curse is hardly a game, and yet I have no way of dissecting my situation unless I play with it just a little bit. I had to keep myself distracted. I thought of the Threnody. I thought of the musical notes burned into the back of my brain. My ears twitched as I imagined each tune long before I performed them. In the streets of Ponyville, before the gracious bits of other ponies being flung before me, I had been practicing the tunes, but each occasion was a purposeful alteration of the true composition. I couldn't practice the actual instrumentals by striking each note true. A perfect playthrough meant activating the magical spell attached to the elegy I was performing. I very deeply feared afflicting the ponies around me with the same mystical burden that I and I alone was enduring. After all, the purpose of freeing myself from the curse was finding a way to commune with such souls in the first place. It was a noble goal, and it was worth all of the trials, tribulations, and shivers, most of the time. I felt a great shadow looming over me. With a gasp of joy, I realized that I had finally stumbled upon the treehouse. Various masks of exotic design greeted me as I all but stumbled into the door, rapping upon it with a shuddering hoof. I clung to myself, shivering upon the threshold. I felt weaker this visit. I wasn't sure how long I was going to last. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait long. I heard her voice almost immediately.
Come and enter, stranger or friend, for I have brews for all ills contained within.
I took a deep, deep breath and opened the door. I had to work at every quivering muscle into producing a neighborly grin. "Good afternoon, Miss Sakura." I nearly stumbled dead across her floor. I locked the joints in my legs and stood as tall as I could, my teeth showing in the green torchlight. "I'm so sorry to bother you."
"It is hardly a bother, kindly mare,"
said the meditative zebra. She stood over a bubbling cauldron, squinting at a series of herbs that she was sprinkling over a new and experimental concoction.
"So long as you are in my house, you are in my care."
"Well, that's good." I winced past a wave of chills. I was afraid to look up, as if expecting the dangling decorations from her desert homeland to be replaced with deadly icicles. I've been told that you're a local hermit and that you very rarely wander into town." The fact that this was the 5th or 6th time reciting these words didn't make the task any less awkward. "But I'm desperate to finish this scientific experiment that I'm working on for the Manhattan University, and I'm short for regents. I'm told that you have several soundstones that you commonly sell. Is that true?" I clenched my teeth. I knew Sakura's answer before she said it. I only needed her to come out with it quickly. If only zebras were as punctual in their predictability as ponies.
Magical soundstones, a ram-crafted delight,"
Sakura murmured to the hazy atmosphere of her home as she stirred the broth before her.
"I say 5 pony bits per rock sounds about right. I wish I could charge less, but unfortunately soundstones are acquired through much trial and difficulty."
She trotted over towards a shelf where the black box resided. In so doing, she cast me the first glance since I entered, and her blue eyes widened.
"By the shadows, pony, your attire! Is Equestria due for a blizzard most dire?"
"Here we go." I swallowed hard and did a very brave thing. I lowered the hoods of both my cloak and my hoodie. Whether or not Sakura could spot the chattering teeth beneath my smiling lips, I can never tell. I can only hope the gesture is enough to distract her, and so far it's worked every time. "There's no cause for alarm, Miss Sakura. Ponyville's not expecting inclement weather. It's just me and my condition."
"And what condition, pray tell, is that?"
Sakura grabbed 4 dark crystals from the black box and cradled them in a prehensile tail. She trotted toward me with an expression that was half concerned, half amused.
"Before you, the most pony I've seen is wear a hat."
"It's genetic, so none of your medicines will help me." After so many trips, it was the best excuse I had for making these visits short. I have nothing against Sakura. I'm sure I would love her company, and if I could predict her trips to downtown Ponyville, I would visit her there in a heartbeat. It was just that the longer I stayed in her home, the more certain I was that my hooves would go permanently numb. Seriously, all I came for was the soundstones. I was already reaching telekinetically into my floating bag of coins. Several weeks of street performances went into this shivering moment, and I wasn't about to tarry. 5 bits per stone? It also happens I have about 20 bits here.
Surely there is more that I can do.
Zikora's face was long and sad. Then suddenly it brightened.
Perhaps a sample of dragon's brew?
Oh, shoot. She had never said that on any of the visits before.
I stood, frozen in mid-payment, like a tourist who had suddenly gotten lost in the middle of a horrible jungle. Dragon's brew? Miss Zikora, I swear, all I need is... But she was already reaching from the jar on a nearby counter and pouring red liquid into a wooden bowl.
If there is any noble truth taught me by pony kind, it's that one must keep hospitality first in mind. You can consider these soundstones as good as sold, but it would be cruel to let you leave so infirmed and cold.
Miss Zikora, seriously. I ran a hoof over my face. Why do I have to be cursed in the middle of a sea of blessings? I could have just grabbed the stones and ran. I could have even stolen them and used the 20 bits for my own benefit later. What would have mattered? Zikora wouldn't have remembered me, whether I was a robber or a saint. Why do I have to play by this code? Haven't I gone through enough as it is? I'm alone in this nightmare. Don't I deserve to play a little dirty for once, especially if it means me getting what I need faster? You don't need to give me anything.
Your words say no, but your voice says yes.
She pierced me as much with her smile as she did with that statement, all the while motioning me toward the fresh potion she prepared.
Your tremble should decrease as soon as you ingest.
I sometimes wonder if I'd be any less transparent if those I live with actually remember me. With a defeated breath, I marched over and gracefully accepted her medicinal gift. The taste wasn't half as bitter as the knowledge of its uselessness. I've no doubt Zikora's brews could cure ponypox, leprosy, or even Pegasus arthritis. The only thing capable of appeasing my situation is a smile, blissful and ignorant, and it was my job at the moment to aim it at her. Thank you very much, Miss Zikora. That was very generous of you.
It should provide enough heat to carry you back from where you came, she said. And now that you've sampled the dragon's brew, might I trouble you for your name?
Lyra, I recited. Lyra Heartstrings. I set off the invisible metronome in my head in anticipation of what would come next.
Such a delightful name is Heartstrings. If only every soul was designed after beautiful things.
I can't help it. I giggle every time I hear that. That alone, far more than the brew, made the cold momentarily manageable. Gee, thanks. Too bad you don't have an instrument to read such lyrics off to.
My spoken rhyme is merely shamanistic tradition,
Zikora explained as she marched over to the nearby counter and picked the stones back up again.
I dare not encroach upon the ways of a musician.
Why not? I asked. As I spoke, my gaze fell upon a wooden engraving lying on a nearby shelf. I saw the illustration of several zebra figures gathered around what looked to be a pair of festive drums. I felt my heart beating at the very notion. Music is the best expression of the soul, I said, my eyes dripping forlornly over the desert illustration, be it zebra or pony. After a pause, I hoofed her the 20 bits and slid the 4 soundstones she offered into my pouch. Zikora had said something new to me this visit, so I felt like saying something new to her. I'm sure there's plenty of songwriters in town who'd love to work on something with you that doesn't involve herbs or potion making. Twilight Sparkle and her friends speak very highly of you. Otherwise, I would never have thought to come here for these rocks.
She replied, I am sure they have better ways of spending their time than attempting to shape melody around a zebra's rhyme.
But you're so... I gazed around at the walls surrounding us. All too soon, I felt the shivers returning, but this time they were for her and not for me. I realized that the only alien thing in that place was me. Zikora had made a home away from home for herself, and the foundations of her little nest were as beautiful as they were strange. You're so alone here, I eventually murmured, failing to hide the trembles in my frame once more. And I get the feeling it's because you choose to be Miss Zecora. If I were you... I bit my lip. What was I doing? I should have just left and been done with it all. I'd gotten the stones. Foolishly, I continued. If I knew that I had so many friends in town, I wouldn't spend half as much time alone as I already do. Zecora seemed unaffected by my impassioned plea. She trotted back to her cauldron like a soldier returning to her post.
What I do in solitude, I do for the best. A shaman's work isn't done until she's finished her quest.
I gazed forlornly her way. And all of those years that we spent working on something so important to us. I struggled through a wave of frost. I felt like my eyeballs would freeze in their sockets, and yet I struggled to keep staring at her. That's a long time to live without a soundtrack, don't you think? At that, she glanced curiously up at me. She gave a gentle smile.
I am curious that you would speak of we. Is there a shaman in this room other than me?
I'm sure that the chuckle coming out of her lips was meant to be whimsical. However, to me, it felt like a bitter pill, more nauseating than all of the world's exotic brews sloshed together. Shaman? Musician? Goddess? I gulped hard. The walls were closing in, and all of them laced with ice. I stumbled backwards out of the treehouse, as if I was tripping over a snowbank. What's in a title if we don't have any pony but ourselves to share our gifts with? Something reflected in the surface of Zecora's bubbling cauldron, other than her face. To her squinting blue eyes, it looked like a fine mist of vapors. She glanced up at the walls of her home. Aside from the curious sensation of having just used her voice to speak, this revelation had no effect on her. After all, she was always alone. I returned to my cabin well before the sun set. Even then, I didn't immediately start performing the Threnody of Night. I had to recover from my trip into the veritable tundra that the ever-free forest was to me. I laid in the corner of my cot, huddled beneath a mountain of blankets. I stayed there, weathering the fading waves of cold, practicing the Threnody in my head. But I did more than that. I had to steel myself for what I was about to do, for what no amount of meditation could truly prepare me for. You would think my life is predictable, given the circumstances. That couldn't be further from the truth. My entire situation is one immense dive into the unknown. Even the very alicorn who invented these tunes is oblivious to the masterpieces I'm endeavoring to unlock. The only soul who possibly knows an ounce of truth is Nightmare Moon. And all ponies, those cursed and those blessed, are equally happy to see her gone for good. It is the task of mortals to make sense out of senselessness. Goddesses have galloped among us for millennia, and this has never stopped being true. When my task becomes too formidable to bear, I simply remind myself that while I may be alone with my memories, I am hardly alone in my struggles. I take little comfort from this understanding, but I do take a decent amount of strength. After an hour and a half of rest, I decided that I was ready. I grabbed my lyre. I grabbed a torch. I grabbed my music sheets, my notes, and an oil lantern. Finally, I brought along the 4 dark crystal soundstones, devices that have been used for ages by rams and unicorns alike for absorbing acoustical frequencies. After hours of reading in Twilight's library, I learned that these same materials were used by proto-equestrians in harnessing the frequencies of mystical enchantment. It's hypothesized that the substance had originally been made out of a vibrating stone whose age predates the first rise of discord. As a matter of fact, the rocks were believed to be immune to waves of chaos energies. After utilizing them myself, I realized that I could properly channel the effects of the lunar elegies and contain them to a small area of focus so that the instrumentals I performed became much more manageable. If there was anything I needed from that evening, it was a way to properly manage whatever would come next. With beautiful irony, evening had fallen.
I trotted the dark length from my cabin to a tiny wooden shack positioned along the edge of the woods. My dim lantern illuminated my path. Reaching the shack, I unlatched the wooden door and opened it, revealing a hidden flight of wooden steps that led down a steep trench dug out of the earth. I had shoveled the hollow myself, spending several months of flexing my telekinetic muscle. Closing the door to the shack behind me, I marched down the depths of 15 feet until I was finally standing in the center of a 20 by 30 foot rectangular cellar. When I first started these experiments, I wasn't sure exactly what danger the magical instrumentals might pose upon the residents of Ponyville all around me. I decided to play it safe and fashion for myself a bunker of sorts, within which I could perform my lonely symphonies in full confidence that no other soul could hear the compositions of Princess Luna besides my accursed self. I hung the lantern from a metal hook implanted in the roof of the underground niche. A dim amber light danced across the wooden boards, barricading the walls of soil all around me. The floor was a sea of even gravel that crunched under my hoofs, except for a plank of wood in the center, atop which a metal stand resided. Upon this pedestal I planted my lyre. With magic, I floated a wooden stool over and propped it in front of the instrument. I then laid the sound stones in key positions in the 4 corners of the wooden plank, so that they surrounded me and my instrument. I meditated, focused upon the ley lines of magic attuned to my horn, and enchanted the 4 crystals. They glowed with a dark emerald haze that played with the amber kiss of the lantern above, making it feel like hearth-warming morning. Sitting down in the center of the ethereal halo, I collected my breaths, then propped the notebook full of musical notations in a notch positioned halfway up the pedestal. For several numb minutes, I sat in dead silence, half buried in the earth like a ghost I was made to be, teetering upon the edge of unknowing. The hardest part of experimenting is always starting the experiment to begin with. What am I to discover? What horror or elation waits for me at the end of my last strummed note? Will I find a cure to my curse, or a deeper degree of damnation? I thought of Ch4 for some reason. I thought of her sitting in the middle of her house, just as alone, just as far away from home, working on the latest of her shamanistic experiments. I wondered what drove her to do what she did, and in such solitude as well. Was it all pure medicinal altruism? Did she have a goal in mind? Did she benefit from everything she did, and did alone? I envied her zeal, her courage, to embark on a daily basis to work on things non-stop for the simple sake of being busy. The day that my curse is cured, what will I do? Will I have as much of a drive as Ch4? Will I live up to all the things I've ever wanted the ponies of this town to see in me? Nothing ever seems to get done when I think too much. That's why it helps to just do things. And the only thing I had to do yesterday was the experiment. I forced myself into the first throes of it, breathing evenly, sitting in a calm pose atop the stool as I forced the first of several strings to vibrate along the channels of my telekinesis. Prelude to Shadows began, and with it came the shivering waves of paranoia. I felt the amber shadows of the lantern dancing above me as the dissonant chords came to life. I kept playing, choosing to focus on the protective green aura of the soundstone surrounding me. Soon enough, the prelude's eerie melody ended. It is a short instrumental after all. My heart was ready for the sunset bolero. The cellar resonated with its pulsating tempo as invisible percussion instruments sounded off in my head. I felt the glow of green light increase, and I realized it was from my horn and not the crystals engulfing me. The emerald brilliance began to shift and flicker, and that's how I knew that the march of the tides had begun. I allowed the numbness of the music piece to creep over my body, sending me weightless and fearless into the instrumental that was to come.
the darkness sonata started, and already I felt my blood beginning to freeze over. The lantern light was growing dimmer, or so I told myself. I stifled a whimper deep in my throat and kept my eyes wide open to the subterranean blackness that was burying me. I felt as though the weight of the 20,000 generations of moon phases was bearing down on my body. In desperation, I swam toward the pale orb in some imaginative sky, and I discovered several invisible arms carrying me there upon streams of mesmerizing cadence. I no longer felt afraid, for the waltz of stars was accompanying me. My vision returned, and I embraced the lantern light once again with steely determination, for the hardest veil was just about to come. It hit me like a solid block of ice. I nearly fell out of my chair as the frigid kiss of the moon's elegy ripped through me, threatening to shatter my soul like glass. I skated across the alabaster surface of its melody with tenacity, utilizing every nimble talent in this lone musician's arsenal, for it was the last layer of mystery I knew how to pierce. The threnody of night was next, the death of all my music and the anthem thereof. I tackled the dirge like a monk, pure in form and devoid of flair. One does not show off before the reaper. I was not about to turn a masterpiece into a farce. The solemnity of the tune was excruciating to my ears. I felt my breaths like delicate punctuations between each string pluck. If I hadn't seen the walls around me with my naked eyes, I could have sworn the cellar had morphed into a bottomless ravine. Where had all the echoes gone? Was it the soundstones creating this deathly silence that gobbled up the vibrating edge of each chord? Did the acoustics simply die? I couldn't panic. There was no way to afford an error at this point. Who knows what would happen if I stopped in the middle of this instrumental, especially after I had played so much of it so perfectly? Was it perfect? It had to have been. What could have been more melodious than this? I had played variations of this tune so many times in the streets of Ponyville, and never once did it appeal to me with such beauty. A haunting beauty. A beauty that could tell a diseased foal that it was okay to embrace the darkness, for there was something beyond the black veil that was even more comforting than a mother's kiss. Dear Celestia, what was I thinking? What was this threnody speaking to me? I tried to call back to it, but something was deafening my ears. I heard the rattling of infinite chains swirling into the dark navel of the world like cyclonic black intestines. Art teachers lied to me when I was young, for there have always existed colors that were never meant to be seen, and suddenly every single one of them was reaching out from the threnodi's throat for me, blacker than black, like the blood of something that had crawled and wheezed across the world long before the goddesses gave birth to air, light, and sorrow. I was too cold to be scared. The moon's elegy had made sure of that. I was a flightless insect being shoved down the maw of something far too enormous to be put into words, for the only way to recognize all that existed was to forget it. My mind was not large enough. I tried stopping my music, but the lyre was going on without me. If I had a hammer, I would have smashed my horn to dust, but I found that the same thing was happening to my hooves. I looked down at my forelimbs, and all I saw was tears. The air grew sour. I looked without looking. I couldn't feel my body anymore. The light of the lantern had gone out. The crystals had all but shattered. A gray haze had filled the cellar. It tasted like a baby's first nightmare. I entreated the walls, and the walls buckled. They leaked in 1,000 places. They must have been as sad as I was to be crying so much. When their tears broke through, with the gloss of ages overcoming me in a frozen deluge,
I gave up trying to count the many places in the world through which they'd shattered. There were so many dying black stars, like the sand of a beach catching fire and burning out forever. I fell back, and the cellar fell with me. Into the blacker than black we swam, past the chains, past the strings of the lyre stretching like wing bones from horizon to horizon, submerged, glittering with the pale sheen of endless moonlight. There, hidden beyond all shadows, I finally found my voice, and it was sobbing. Alone in the penumbra of all my hopes and horrors, I cuddled that voice, and I heard.
This is the place in my heart. This is the place where I'm falling apart. Isn't